Hey, I just want to ask a question. Am I being arrested for something I didn't do?
You've been arrested.
Take a close look at this interrogation excerpt.
How did the evening pan out?
Yeah, pretty good.
This is Jesse Kempson. In 2018, he was arrested for the brutal murder of British backpacker Grace Millane. She wanted a little bit of adventurous fun and decided to check out the local Tinder scene in New Zealand. When she found Jesse, Grace thought he was the missing piece to the puzzle of her heavenly holiday, but he abused her trust in people in the most horrible way. Before we dive in, I must warn you, we'll be discussing mature themes, rape, and death. If that's not something you want to hear about, this is your chance to turn back. Okay, let's explore the story of the disgusting Tinder killer and the tragic case of Grace Millane. This story begins in Auckland, New Zealand. New Zealand might be a tiny country and a relatively small island, but Auckland is not a small city. It's got the highest population in the country, around 1.5 million people. Auckland is buzzing with restaurants, bars, nightclubs, happy youngsters, and of course, lots of tourists. And as a Commonwealth country, New Zealand attracts loads of British tourists. Many of these young backpackers curious to learn about the world before delving into a busy life. Such was the case of Grace Emmy Rose Millane. She was born on December 2nd, 1996, to David and Gillian in Wickford, UK. She was their youngest child, and she grew up in a large, happy family with her parents and 2 older brothers, Michael and Declan. Everyone who knew Grace described her with the same words: creative, sociable, and very likable. Grace's biggest passion was animals, and she would spend a lot of her time painting them, especially her favorite animal, the elephant. But it's not like Grace would just stay at home and paint elephants. In 2018, she graduated from the University of Lincoln with a bachelor's in marketing and advertising. The Millanes were certain she would have a bright career ahead of her, and Grace was confident too. But she didn't want to dive into work straight away. She'd saved some money over the previous years, and she wanted to have a nice, long break from the many years of hard studying. Plus, she was closing in on her 22nd birthday, and she wanted a bit of lighthearted fun. But Grace could also be a deep and caring person. Just before going away, she cut her long hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that does wigs for kids undergoing cancer treatment. It's easy to see how people described Grace as very lovable. On October 26, 2018, Grace kissed her family goodbye and left for a year-long road trip around the world via Heathrow Airport. Tragically, the vacation, as well as her life, would end much sooner. Grace started her trip with a 6-week tour of South America. She started in Peru and then very slowly headed north. Grace was a fan of wild adventures, urban and natural alike, and she was also a social animal. Throughout her South American tour, she would group up with a myriad of travelers. They would hike together, sometimes drink at the end of the day, and take lots of pictures to share their trip with the folks back home.
And was keen to share her journey with everyone back home.
But Grace's newfound friends would stay in South America or go back home. She would enter New Zealand by herself on November 19th, 2018. Grace first traveled around the upper North Island, seeing towns, villages, and the gorgeous Kiwi natural sceneries. By the end of the month, she arrived in Auckland and checked into a hostel called the Base Backpackers on Queen Street. The hostel wasn't much, but it was exactly the kind of place dedicated to people like her, young travelers who wanted safe, economic rooms to share with other backpackers. Sadly, she wouldn't be safe for long. Grace quickly befriended her hostel roommates, and again she had people to explore Auckland with. But Grace wanted more. Her birthday was coming up too. It was just 2 days away, and she thought she'd reward herself with a bit of adult fun too. So when she checked into the Base Backpackers, Grace also checked her Tinder account. The next day, Grace put on a black dress and white shoes and headed out of the Base Backpackers. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. On November 30th, Grace matched with a guy called Jesse Kempson on Tinder. He was a local Kiwi, and Grace found him attractive too. As soon as they matched, Jesse asked her if she had any plans for the weekend. Grace didn't mention to Jesse she was traveling by herself. Initially, she wasn't sure about going out with a guy on the same day that they started talking, but once Jesse proposed a plan for December 1st, Grace said, maybe. That's all Jesse needed to push for a date ASAP. Yeah, this kind of desperation is usually a pretty big red flag. It's not flattering if they don't know you yet. Sadly, Jesse knew that if he was pushy enough, he would get Grace, or another girl, to give in and say yes. Indeed, Grace didn't want to drag it on for too long with Jesse. She thought, why not? She wasn't going to be in New Zealand forever. Better make the best of it. So, on the evening of December 1st, Grace walked out of her hostel and over to Sky City, where Jesse suggested they meet. When they spotted each other, they hugged briefly and headed in the direction suggested by Jesse. He was going to be her guide for the night, as Grace knew practically nothing about the Auckland bar scene. Sky City has a pretty big range of restaurants and bars, so the two wanted to try out a few. First, Jesse took Grace to Andy's Burger Bar. After having dinner and sharing an occasional giggle, Grace and Jesse headed over to a Mexican cafe down the road. Grace had seen Sky City and wanted to check out other places too. Grace's best friend, Amina, knew about her date. So throughout her time with Jesse, Grace would text Amina. Her messages were very hopeful.
I click with him so well. He's an oil manager. He lives in a hotel.
But Grace would never get to text Amina or any of her loved ones ever again. If only they could read about her last moments in her own words. Sadly, Jesse asked Grace a lot of questions and seemed genuinely interested in her, but he didn't give a lot of details about his own life. If Grace had known about his dating history, she never would have gone out with him. Throughout the months leading up to meeting Grace, Jesse had had dozens of chats with other women on Tinder. He would usually lie about his life, telling each of them a different story about himself. But one thing stayed the same. He told all women that he liked feet, dominating, and trust me, it gets worse. On a Tinder date, Jesse boasted that he was a cousin of an Al Black star. Then they had intercourse, and she said she had to fight for her life. That was no longer consensual, rough sex. It was him trying to hurt her. Luckily, she got away in time, but others weren't so lucky. 8 months before meeting Grace, another 21-year-old British tourist was forever scarred by a first date with Jesse. He had violated her. After their date, also at Sky City, Jesse took the women up to his room and suggested they get it on. When she refused, he did it anyway, even though she cried and screamed the whole time. The woman said that she would wake up screaming and crying for months after the event. And it doesn't even end here. Jesse once had a girlfriend. According to her, he terrorized her and abused her for months. He would even threaten her with sharp objects and force her into humiliating intercourse after convincing her that he was sent to kill her. Jesse was deeply disturbed and a violent person, and women were just prey for him. Tinder was his hunting ground. So when he met Grace and heard she had no plans for the weekend, he thought she was ideal in the most horrifying way. Before meeting up with Grace, Jesse went by himself to a local bar right next to City Life, the Bluestone Room. There, he downed 4 beers in just half an hour. You'd be excused for thinking he had first date jitters, but 4 beers are rarely an answer for that, and Jesse didn't have butterflies in his stomach. Skip ahead to the Mexican cafe. Grace found Jesse fun and friendly, perhaps too friendly as the drinks kept pouring in. In an hour or two, they drank 2 jugs of margaritas and 1 of sangria. Eventually, Jesse paid the second bill. But their date was not over. They figured they were going to do a classic Saturday night pub crawl. So Jesse took his date to the Bluestone Room, the very bar he had been drinking at alone before meeting her. There, at 8:40 p.m., Grace and Jesse had their first kiss. After smooching a few times, Jesse left the room and Grace checked her phone. There were no messages from Amina. A few moments later, Grace left the room and Jesse checked Grace's purse. What was he searching for? Did he try to unlock her phone and check her messages? Sadly, this is exactly the kind of obsessive, invasive behavior that he showed from the beginning, when he insisted that Grace went out with him. Just before Grace returned from the bathroom, Jesse grabbed his phone and opened Facebook. Jesse wrote this comment at 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, 2018, 11 minutes before taking Grace to room 308, where he would take her life. As soon as Grace returned to the table, the two embraced and left the bar. They went back to Sky City Hotel, where Jesse revealed that he lived. Indeed, his home was room 308 in a hotel. Grace thought that they would have a night of fun on her 22nd birthday, but Jesse had other plans. The morning of December 2nd came, and it was Grace's birthday. She had kept in touch with her family all this time, constantly texting them and sending pictures from her exciting trip. Now it was their turn to contact her and wish her a happy birthday. People were calling Grace every few minutes, but there was no reply from Grace. This was strange. First of all, the New Zealand time zone is much later than the UK one. There's a 13-hour gap, so it's not like Grace could be sleeping in the evening. Soon, her family began to worry. Her brother Declan said Grace would usually bombard them with pictures and messages from her trip. Now, both her phones were going straight to voicemail. Her silence, especially on her birthday, was very unnerving. On December 5th, Grace's parents reported her missing to the Auckland police. It's unclear whether her parents waited this long because they were quietly waiting for their daughter to call, or because the police wouldn't file a missing person report sooner than 72 hours. Considering the law in the US, it's likely this was the case in New Zealand as well. But as soon as the report was filed, the investigators began searching for Grace. They started with the base backpackers. If foul play was involved, they suspected someone in the hostel could very likely be involved. But when the hostel checked their CCTV footage, they found out that Grace hadn't checked in on December 1st or 2nd. There was a strange clue inside Grace's hostel room. Most of her belongings were there, so she wasn't planning on staying out for too long. So the investigators' initial theory was that Grace had gone to stay with some friends and forgotten to contact people was off the table. And of course, the Millane family made it all too clear that she would not forget to contact them. So someone had made Grace disappear. But who could have had that intention? She didn't know anyone in town. Luckily for the police, the answer was too obvious to miss. There was CCTV footage from all of the places Grace had been with Jesse. And remember how he'd commented on her Facebook profile pic on the very night of her disappearance? Well, the author of the comment had a profile pic as well, and the police quickly identified him as the guy accompanying Grace on the CCTV footage, and the guy drinking by himself before the date. There was another uncanny detail. On December 1st, before meeting Grace, Jesse had written a long post on his Facebook page that was concerning, to say the least. I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life so far that I'm not proud of, some of which have greatly affected others. I firstly want to extend the most sincere apologies for this. In the exam of life, you can't retest yourself with the same question paper, but we can change how we treat each other, and over time, I've learned that every action has a reaction, but I've also learned how much compassion we all have as people, as I have recently been diagnosed with severe anxiety. This is a message written by a man a few hours before he committed murder. How disturbing is this? How can you show remorse for your past actions and then go on and do one of your worst yet? Well, the people who knew Jesse would have known that he was lying in his apologetic post. Jesse Shane Kempson was born in Wellington in 1992. His parents split up when he was very little, and neither of them wanted the burden of being a single parent, so they kept sending him from one parent to the other. Because of this, Jesse moved around the country a lot. Then his parents sent him to live with his grandparents, but he would be on and off with them too. He had zero stability in his life. This is perhaps why Jesse became, in the words of those who knew him, a pathological liar. He lied about having famous relatives and even convinced a few acquaintances that he was dying of cancer. Clearly, these were the lies of someone who wanted a lot of attention. But instead of attention, Jesse's lies got him into trouble, as people figured out he was dishonest. The lies got him fired from jobs and kicked out of apartments. On one occasion, he told his landlord he was a professional softball player for the national team, the Black Sox, and that he was waiting for his new contract money. The landlord kept waiting for the money, but soon enough, they figured out Jesse was lying. 8 weeks later, the landlord contacted the Black Sox team, and they confirmed they had no player with that name. Needless to say, Jesse was evicted. Then Jesse started renting his city life room, but he told the hotel manager it was a Woolworths manager. He was in fact unemployed, living on state benefits. And on the same day that Jesse met Grace, he was fired from his last job at a telephone company after more compulsive lying. He was bitter, angry, and frustrated with his life as a whole. And even though he'd just written a seemingly heartfelt post on Facebook, he wasn't willing to make amends. Instead, he was going to take out his anger and sociopathic tendencies on an innocent girl who trusted people just like she trusted herself. So, in the late evening of December 1st, Grace and Jesse arrived arm in arm at the City Life Hotel on Queen Street. They went upstairs to Jesse's room, and within an hour, Jesse murdered Grace. Imagine how terrified Grace must have felt in her last moments. This was not an instant kill. It was slow, and it was premeditated. Only when she got to room 308, Jesse's home, did she realize who he really was and what his morbid intentions were. Grace passed away right around midnight on her birthday at the hands of a disgusting Tinder date. That night, Jesse didn't call anyone, not friends or the emergency services, but at around 1:30 a.m., he started Googling things. Hottest fire and Whitaker ranges were among his searches. He was looking for the perfect place to burn Grace's body. Not only was he affected by what he'd done, he didn't even care that he would leave a search history as he plotted to bury his victim. Here's where it gets really nasty. After Jesse decided on a burial place, he searched for adult content online and chose a video to watch. Then he took 7 intimate pictures of Grace, manipulating her to get into the positions he wanted. Sheesh. And in an even creepier twist, with Grace's lifeless body still decorating his carpet, Jesse opened Tinder again. That night, he talked to another woman and insisted, just like he'd done with Grace, to go out with her the next evening. He hadn't even disposed of the body when he was arranging his next date. Satisfied with the woman's response, Jesse changed his clothes, went to town, and bought a suitcase. Then he went to a supermarket to get cleaning products for the carpet in his room. Finally, he went to a car hire firm and got a red Toyota hatchback. The plan to get rid of Grace's body was complete. But before he could do that, he had a date to go on, remember? That's right, with the body still in his room, Jesse went out on his Tinder date. He met the 27-year-old woman in a bar called Reverly, where he told her that all his friends were police officers and that his closest friend was coming to New Zealand to be a crown prosecutor. While they were talking, Jesse went on to comment, "It's crazy how guys can make one wrong move and go to jail for the rest of their life." The moment she heard this remark, the woman started getting restless. She wondered if he was talking about himself, so she asked this. Jesse said no, he'd just heard about a guy who asked his girlfriend to have rough intercourse. Then things went bad and she passed away in the process. His date listened closely and she could notice how his face became very animated. He was definitely not talking about a friend. She said, "I think he was just in his own world telling this story. I think I just felt a bit uncomfortable." The prosecution would later say he was testing out the story he planned to peddle in front of the jury. Within a few hours, the woman knew she didn't want to spend any more time with Jesse. He was telling her lie after lie, and the jail comment was pretty creepy. So she quickly left the bar and made sure he didn't follow her to her car. He didn't, but that evening he kept texting her, insisting that she should go on a second date with him. All of this with Grace's body still in his room. Luckily, his new date never replied to his texts. That evening, Jesse hired a machine called a rug doctor and went into his room to clean up the scene. Later on, the CCTV shows him going downstairs to his rental car with 2 large suitcases, one of which was the one he had just bought. Then he drove off and stopped by a large store to get a shovel before driving some more. Jesse thought this could be the start of a horrific killing spree. He could keep using Tinder to lure women to his house of horrors. But within a few days, Jesse would be behind bars. On December 5th, the day the police started looking into Grace's disappearance, Jesse was asked by Detective Diana Levinson to get in touch. They spoke on the phone the next morning, and Jesse said he'd met Grace, but they parted ways at around 10 p.m. on December 1st. However, he was still asked to come to the police station and give a formal statement. Jesse didn't come. But the police officers were already suspicious, so when they spotted him at the City Life Hotel, they approached him and drove him to the station for his first interview.
Tell us about Grace.
So I was talking to Grace on Tinder.
Yeah.
We'd matched on Friday. I saw that we'd matched the next day on Saturday. And then we met at Sky City. And then we decided that we were going up to Andy's Burger Bar.
Jesse seemed pretty at ease in front of the detective, but as his questions started heading toward Grace's murder, he became pretty agitated.
It's entirely possible that she's been the victim of foul play.
Okay.
You understand what that means?
Yeah.
What would your feelings be about providing us with a voluntary DNA sample in the event that we can compare that against something? Would you be happy
Yeah,
with
100%. I mean, I know I haven't done anything wrong, so I'm happy to do it.
that? Okay.
Jesse mentioned twice that he wanted to feel safe. First, he wanted to meet Grace ASAP to make sure he wasn't being catfished. Then he took a long way home as he felt safer down those roads. It's truly disturbing to hear a killer talk about wanting to feel safe. When Jesse was left by himself in the interview room, he got anxious.
Hey, I just want to ask a question. Am I being arrested for something I didn't do?
You haven't been arrested, mate.
Oh, sorry.
Jesse was initially released from the station as the police were analyzing 6 terabytes of CCTV footage. But within a few days, the officers had found enough footage to demonstrate the two had never parted ways at 10 p.m., as Jesse had said. There's more. There wasn't any footage of Grace leaving the room, ever. All that was left to analyze were Jesse's actions on December 2nd. They saw him leave the room, buy the suitcase and the cleaning products, and rent his Toyota. They saw him then meet the 27-year-old Tinder date at a local bar, then come back home with the rug doctor. Later, Jesse loaded his car with 2 giant suitcases via hotel trolleys. The CCTV footage trail gets even creepier. Jesse appeared at the supermarket at 7 a.m. buying a shovel. 2 hours later, he was spotted giving his car a power wash just before returning it to the rental company. Finally, over the next few days, Jesse was seen dumping several things in bins across his area. With the CCTV footage as evidence, the police turned up at Jesse's hotel room with a search warrant. By December 7th, Grace's dad, David, had arrived in Auckland. His emotional plea was shown on all TV stations.
Grace is a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, family-orientated daughter. Grace has never been out of contact for this amount of time.
By December 8th, the police now had enough evidence to arrest Jesse and interrogate him again. By now, Jesse's fake story had completely changed.
Tell me what happened last Saturday.
She started talking to me about 50 Shades of Grey. We started having sex. At first it was just normal. And then she asked me if we could get into having, I guess, more violence. We ended up on the floor, and then she told me to hold her throat.
Jesse then said it somehow ended, but he doesn't remember how. He ended up falling asleep in the shower, drunk, and then waking up the next morning only to find Grace's lifeless body on the floor. He panicked and drove somewhere to bury her body. He was charged with first-degree murder, in spite of his complaints that he was innocent. A forensic search of Jesse's room showed a lot of Grace's blood on the floor. On the same day, Jesse took the police to Grace's burial site on the Wedacare Reservation.
I can now advise that a short time ago, we located a body which we believe to be Grace.
The Millane family finally had an answer, but a devastating one. Thousands of people took to the streets to hold vigils and remember an innocent backpacker who didn't deserve such a brutal end. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, publicly apologized to Grace's family in the name of the country.
On behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that.
During his trial, Jesse pleaded not guilty. Secondly, there were all the details about what Jesse did after the murder, the pictures, the adult content, and the new Tinder date. Still, Jesse's defense team tried to argue that Grace's death was just an accident, resulting from drunk people having rough sex. But this was a huge lie, and it would be confirmed when Jesse's former victims started talking. Among those who took the stand were the women who Jesse had violated 8 months prior, and his ex-girlfriend, who recalled 8 counts of horrific physical and sexual abuse. The first witness looked Jesse in the eye and said, "I am not scared. I am strong. I am not alone. I am loved. I have so much to look forward to in my life, and I will not look back. You don't have any power over me anymore." Jesse was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When he was convicted of an assault of 2 other women, he told the judge,
"You have no reason to convict me, you're full of."
Perhaps the only thing worse than a killer is a killer without remorse. Grace's family had a proper burial for their daughter, and with Jesse behind bars, they can slowly move on. But it is not an easy process.
I sit full of guilt, knowing I couldn't help her, but I should have been there. She died terrified and alone in a room with you.
Thanks for watching, you guys. As always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. See you next time, and stay safe.